the Institute for Study of Peak States presents the 6th International Psychoimmunology and Psychobiology Research Symposium. In this video, Spiritual States from the Tantra Traditions by Gaëtan Klein. Hello everybody, Gaëtan here. You know me. I hope that you're enjoying the symposium so far, and welcome to this presentation on exploring spiritual peak states from the Tantra traditions. So, short disclaimer before we go into the content, the statements are going to be reductionist because I don't have a lot of time to talk about these very big topics. So please forgive me if I'm very short on the details of it. I'm discussing these topics from the point of view of research and scientific analysis based on the peak state model. So if you're practicing yourself or if you have a religion, you might find that some of the things I say will contradict what you believe. I mean, no disrespect, but I hope you understand the point of view that I'm taking. And all opinions expressed are my own and not endorsed by anybody else. All right. So in this conversation today, we're going to talk about very exciting things. I've been doing some research and some experience with spiritual practices myself for several years now. And I've made some progress on maybe 4 peak states that we can find in Tantra traditions, which I'm going to tell you about. And we're going to talk about some very interesting details if you want to use this to explore spirituality yourself and apply the same discoveries that I've been making to other states or other spiritual traditions. All right, so let's go, and safety first. So this talk is private. Please do not share it outside of the Institute. If you're watching this video, I assume that you have been trained in trauma healing and spiritual emergencies. So if at any point you are triggered or if you're trying to do research yourself, you have to take full responsibility and ask for help if need be. Don't stay alone. If you encounter something, please reach out. There's always going to be somebody who can support you. So there will be this red triangle on the slides where there are safety issues. So let's go into it. But first, let's take a step back and think about what are we looking for? What are we even here for? Well, we're here because we're looking for peak states of consciousness, right? So we know that these peak states exist. We know that there are several of them. There are dozens of different peak states. And our work is about categorizing them, identifying them, and learning how we can recover those states. And for most people, of course, these states are repressed because of trauma, except that some people have, of course, temporary peak experiences. But most human beings don't realize that these peak states exist and that they are achievable. However, some people feel that they are longing for something or looking for something. And if you're one of these people, probably you are, you've realized by now that you're not looking for something external in your life, but you're looking for recovering an internal experience, a state of being. And one way that human beings have been trying to do this for hundreds and hundreds of years is through spiritual practice. So when we practice spirituality, generally it's because we are attracted to something more. We want something different than our current state of being. And I think that many people have this intuition that there are peak states that exist, but they don't know how to conceptualize them or how to achieve them. The knowledge that we have now in the Institute is pretty new, but spiritual practices have existed for millennia because it's part of the human experience to try to reach those states. And spiritual practices can be designed for that, or at least that's the standpoint that I'm taking today. So these practices can also guide you towards states that you have not really any intuition about, but it can be a complete surprise, which is nice. So I'm going to talk about Tantra, but there are actually 3 different spiritual traditions that are named Tantra. One is very ancient and comes from India. It's called classical Tantra or Shaiva Tantra. And another one, which is most well known today, especially in the Western world, is, we should call it Neo-Tantra. And it's a kind of Tantra which focuses on sexuality. And there's also a branch of Buddhism called Vajrayana, which is tantric. It uses tantric techniques and tantric philosophy to enrich the Buddhist philosophy. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. I don't have time to go into all these traditions in details and explain what they are and differences because I don't have time. I tried to do that and I was doing a 2 hour long presentation, so I'm just going to skip this and talk about my own personal experience. But first, what is Neo-Tantra? What is this practice that I've been doing for some time? So it's a Western and modern reinterpretation of ancient Tantra, and basically it's aiming at reuniting spirituality and sexuality into one way of being, of existing, and reaching higher states of consciousness. So in Tantra, we don't repress sexuality, we try to harness it, to really try to understand what is it, how does it work, and we don't want to be passively submitted to it, but we're trying to actively, consciously use this energy and use it not just for sexual pleasure, but to elevate our consciousness. So we have this idea that sexuality can lead us to a higher state of consciousness. Some principles that are present in all three traditions is that everything is divine in nature. There is nothing that is not divine. So of course, sexuality is part of the divine, but this divinity has to be revealed. So we use sexual desire to amplify some human characteristics and try to reach these divine states of consciousness. A very important and central idea is that men and women are an expression of a cosmic polarity, and we're trying to clarify and then reunite this polarity in Tantra. Another thing that's very important compared to other spiritual traditions is that we work through the body, so it's a very body positive tradition. Your body is divine, and the divine in yourself is going to be expressed through the body. So we don't go away from the body, we don't try to transcend it, we don't try to go into any ethereal space, but we're trying to be more and more present in the body and to discover that there are a lot of things happening within the body. And it's based on direct experience and with the idea that everybody can experience spiritual transformation in this lifetime. So what do we do? What do we do in this Tantra workshop? So it's really beautiful and it's really nice because we don't go to Tantra for having better sex. It might happen as a byproduct, which is nice, but the practices are centered around using it for something else. So the practices are generally about role-playing, what is the masculine and the feminine, what does it mean to be a man, and what does it mean to be a woman. And every man and every woman, we all have both polarities within us, right? We have a feminine side and a masculine side. So by understanding these polarities and how they work, we can find how to be more uniquely ourselves in our expression of our masculinity and our femininity. And we can become a better man if we want to, or a better woman if we want to, or find where we stand in this polarity, and also have a better interaction with the other sex. So with the other person that we are in relationship with, whether it's a man or a woman, we can express a much better dance of polarity if we understand our own polarity and if we work through it. So there's a lot of work about that. There's a lot of dancing and chanting. We make it very beautiful and nice. There's a lot of focus on positivity and beauty. We practice a lot of techniques from yoga and kriyas. We do a lot of chakra breathing. There's a lot of work on the chakras and massage. So we work a lot through the whole body, including, of course, the genital area. And actually, there's a lot of practices that are about releasing traumas, whether it's through breath work, body work, massage, and all kind of things. We try to release those muscular tensions, this armoring, and all the things that are stored in our bodies that prevent us from experiencing a more freer sexuality, and not just sexuality, but the whole expression of our embodiment as being. So there's a lot of therapy actually in Neo-Tantra. And of course, the goal is to achieve more freedom in the expression of sexual energy and to use it for transmutation. So it's not just about having better sex, it's about through the sexual act to experience something divine. And I'm going to tell you more about that and what it means in terms of peak states. So the first peak state in this series is called the heart opening state. So what happened to me is 10 or actually 12 years ago, I was invited to go to a Tantra workshop. I had no idea what it was, and I just understood it was about sexuality and some yogic practices, but I really had no idea. And we did all this crazy stuff. and it was great. Um, Lots of transformation happened, but what was really the most sublime was after the workshop when I got home the next day and I was with my partner and I had this experience of my heart suddenly opening and boom, a huge, intense feeling of love just poured out of my heart. And it felt like I had so much love that I could feel and give that it was a really dramatic experience. Like the love was just extremely intense. And I found that I had this ability where I can send love from my heart toward my partner. And it was really beautiful. Um, it's very different than if you've been doing DPR, for example. If you don't have the state, then you're sending love. But when you have that state, it's a much more different and dramatic and intense experience. It really feels extremely good. And you can open or close your heart at will. So I had the state for about a week and then I lost it, unfortunately. I'm working through to recover the state because it feels absolutely amazing to be able to experience so much love, which is one of the things I'm looking for, but I haven't been able to recover it yet. So it's still in exploration phase, but we believe we might have a developmental event for this. We're still working through it, so it's work in progress. There is no process yet, but we believe that have identified that state and trying to work out to derive a process to get it. But it's a very important state for relationship, love, and connection. So in Neo Tantra, we focus on different spiritual qualities. Love is obviously the most important of them. Opening the heart is something you will hear again and again and again in Tantra. But we also focus on beauty, try to make everything positive, to elicit these feelings of awe and devotion also. So we work a lot through the chakras. We try to harmonize the chakras and to embody the ideal masculine and the ideal feminine, and also to unite them within ourselves and in relationship with our partner. The goal, of course, is to access something qualified as divine through all these practices and this direction. And that leads me to the second peak state in this series. So there is a peak state called the male and female archetype. You can read a little bit about it in Grant's book, Volume 2. It gives an ideal dimension of being masculine for men and feminine for women, and interacting with the other sex in a more positive and functional way. I haven't got the state, so I cannot really describe it more, but I know that the Tantra is moving in that direction. And we have an hypothesis about the developmental event. It's something that happens before conception. I don't give you much more details because we don't really have a process for it, but we know this state exists and it's really positive and useful for relationship and interaction with ourselves and with the other person that we love. So it's very nice state to have, but we don't have a process yet, so it's still exploration. Let's talk about another element of Tantra, which is very interesting. So there is a ritual called transfiguration. Basically, the idea is to see your loved one as divine. So if it's a woman, she's going to be Shakti, the cosmic consciousness of all women. Or if it's a man, it's going to be Shiva, right? Shiva and Shakti are the goddess, the god and goddess that expresses this polarity. So the ritual of transfiguration consists in seeing the other person as a god or a goddess, and to elicit these very masculine or feminine qualities that are hidden, buried somewhere in our consciousness. So one way of doing it, for example, is next time you make love with your partner, to see your partner not just as an individual person, but as all women or all men or a god or a goddess. And I hope it's going to provide you with an interesting and very positive experience. So you can experience sexuality as a devotional act to this divine self in both of you and experience something very interesting. However, I was asking myself, where does it lead? What is the goal of, what can we achieve if we practice this? And if you've read Volume 2, there is a state called the God-Goddess state. And it gives a feeling of being a god or a goddess. Now, we don't know much about that state. We don't know the developmental event. There is no really anything I can tell you about that, but we know it exists. We don't even know if it's supposed to be a permanent functional state, but we know it's something that can be reached for. So nice things to explore again. Let's move on. We have more to say about that. So again, I'm being short and concise, but it's so fascinating to explore all of this. So one of the things I was exploring is the difference between classical Shaiva Tantra, Neo Tantra, and Buddhist Tantra. And the Tantric Buddhism uses a lot of techniques from yoga and Tantra. One of them is has been used to create a technique called Tumo. So in Tumo, you breathe in a certain way to generate heat within yourself. And the Tibetan monks who practice Tumo are very known to go to the top of the mountain in the Himalayas. It's minus 20 degrees and they are almost naked and they just stay there and breathe and they don't die, while every other people would just freeze out. So this technique is really interesting because you can create so much heat that it's said that people who are the masters of this can go to the top of the mountain with a towel, a wet towel on their shoulders, and they have to dry it out while it's minus 20 degrees. So you can see how powerful it can be. So I was really fascinated by this and wondering, how does it work and what can we do about this? And is there another state of consciousness that we can acquire that is linked to this? It seems to be a very important spiritual practice in Tibetan Buddhism. And so I was trying to find information about it, but I didn't find a lot. So I was trying to find, to read sources from ancient Tantra and from Vajrayana. And I was reading this book about Dzogchen, which is practices in Vajrayana. And I was hoping actually to have some practices and to understand how they do it. But it turns out that Dzogchen is quite secret teaching. It's only transmitted from master to student. So you don't find any practices in all the books that are written about it. So I was a bit frustrated because the book was just only about religious stuff that was not really useful. But as I was reading through, there was a line about desire. And I was really curious and really wanted to understand what is it about desire that is spiritual at all, and how does it lead to the divine or to something greater? How can we use this? And I had a moment of inspiration where I realized that I could maybe work on it with the peak state models. And so what I did is I regressed to a moment where I was practicing a ritual in Tantra called Maituna, which is the great union. So you work with sexual desire and you try to amplify it and to elevate yourself. And I decided to use that spiritual experience, even if it was not complete in this moment, but I decided to use it to regress and to treat it like it's a trauma and to regress on it and see where it led me. And it led me to something very interesting. It led me to a developmental event where I turned into a burning flame, and it was really strong and intense and dramatic. And so there is a state called the flame, which is a very important state. And basically your center of awareness turns into a flame. You turn into fire burning. I haven't completed my research on it, so I haven't got the state, so I cannot describe what it really changes in the human consciousness, but we believe it's a very important state. So as of now, I've 3 developmental events that I'm still investigating. The one that I found was the combustion chamber. I call it like that because it feels like you're moving and you're entering a room, a spherical room, which is big, not huge, but quite big. And as you attain the center of it, boom, there is a change and you burst into fire. And it's really intense. There's a lot of positive feelings and there's a strong sexual feeling that's happening in that moment, but there's also death and annihilation. So I haven't been able to completely finish that for some reason. It's very tough. But I've identified that there is another event at origin when you also turn into a flame. And there is also, of course, an event that we know that's happening before conception called the wall of fire. There's a mention of it, I think, in Grant's book, volume 2. But there's a part of you that just turned into a huge fire. And that's an important step before conception. So we believe that state is really important. but we haven't got a way to achieve it yet. However, it's very exciting for me, and I'm also very happy because I was able to make this link between spiritual practices and a specific peak state, which is actually an important state, by using regression on the experiences that the practices were trying to elicit. And so I think it's a very good model that we can replicate with other practices and use them to find the developmental events where a big transformation happens and hopefully get new ways to achieve those peak states. So that's very exciting. Now let's talk a bit about the problem with spiritual practices, because spiritual practices are full of pitfalls and also they always have a central flow. So I was talking about it with Grant, and he helped me to identify that all the people that are attracted to neo-tantra and to sexual practices are avoiding a specific feeling within themselves. And that creates a flow, meaning people who go to these spiritual practices are actually trying to avoid a problem that is activated within themselves. And that problem is a key blockage toward moving towards the end point, the end goal of the spiritual tradition. So it's a big problem because you would think that people who come to spiritual practices are here to move through the blockages and reach the end point, follow the direction of the spiritual tradition and achieve the end goals. But actually, a lot of them get stuck because that flow gets activated, and they, if they're not guided correctly, they can spend a lot of time circling around it, but never actually going through it. So it's counterintuitive, but spiritual practices, if they're not done correctly, you can actually end up being stuck for a long time. And something very interesting that I found when I was exploring this is that there is a big difference between classical ancient Tantra and Neo-Tantra. Actually, they should be considered completely different traditions that are separated. They are not the same thing, even though people from Neo-Tantra refer themselves to ancient techniques all the time. But the way it's practiced is so different that they should almost be considered two different traditions. Now, something that's really interesting is that in ancient Tantra, there's not a lot about sexuality at all. It's not a focus of the tradition. Even though it's included in it, they use sexual energy, but it's really a minor part of the tradition. There's much more work on death, and especially death by fire. There's a lot of meditation, for example, where you burn the world or you turn your body into ashes and you die. And they work a lot through death. As an opposite, in Neo-Tantra, we focus on sexuality, but in all the things that I've seen in the Neo-Tantra world, it seems that people avoid this topic of death in almost all cases. So it turns out that people who are attracted to sexual Tantra are avoiding a flow within themselves, which is the feeling of death. And being able to face it and heal it is actually very important for moving forward towards the end goals of the tradition. So, good news, bad news, but if you're attracted to Tantra, you might have to face this very difficult feeling. However, the good news is you can heal it. So we know a lot about death traumas in peak states. We know that they happen on and on in prenatal development, especially in key events. So facing death and being able to heal it is key. It's a key skill for peak state work and for research, especially. But also it's going to be necessary for some steps for achieving some peak states. So learning how to heal death is very important in our work. And it can be dangerous and can trigger a lot of problems. It's also very tough. But we also have a lot of good techniques to work on this. One of them is a body association technique, because death is very often associated with a lot of things. So if you don't work through the body association, you can trigger homeostasis, right? And that's why it can be very dangerous. But we have this technique. We also have the monoliths, which helps us heal some death trauma relatively easily. If you've been healing monoliths, you know that it gets easier and easier and easier, even though it's still tough, but you can improve the skill of being able to face death. And that's something that's really important in our work, and it's also important in Tantra. So it was really important to discover this and confront this in my own progress and in the peak state research in general. So if you want to navigate through spiritual practices and apply the peak states model, here are a few things to note. First, not all teachers are equal. So ideally, you would want a teacher who has achieved the end goal of the tradition, but that's actually rare. And even though they have the peak state that is the goal of the tradition, they might have other flaws. So you have to be careful about that. You have to look for the flaws in the teachers and also in the students. That's actually one of the key to move through the resistance and go through the steps that are important for transformation in every tradition. But the teaching and the practice are aiming in that direction. So they will point towards the work. However, you have to be mindful that you're going to experience resistance to move there. Now, one thing that's very nice to do is to have intensive workshop, because that's where you might elicit more peak experiences. And when you do, you can use them and use our techniques to work on them. The most important one being regression, like I've used. I hope this example was clear and will inspire you to do so. But be prepared to face severe traumas, right? So how to combine spiritual practices with peak states model? Well, it's very simple. We have a lot of good techniques already. One of them is the experience to state process, which is so great, but we have to use it. So how many times have you used it? How many times have you avoided to use it? I've been guilty of this, I can tell you, but it's a very important process, and there's so many opportunities to use it that we miss for some reason. So I encourage you to try again to use that. Beware of peak state bugs, because that's one of the most common ways that people lose their peak states, sometimes as soon as they acquire them in certain contexts. So be careful of that. The main techniques that I would use again is regression on the actual spiritual experience. So for that, you cannot do regression on the concept. You cannot really find the path with intellectual understanding or philosophy or all these teachings. You have to have an actual experience, a direct experience of something new to be able to use regression. But if you can do so, then you have an opening, you have access to something that you can explore. Something very important also to be wary of is that many spiritual experiences are actually generated by parasites. So you have to learn to detect the difference and to understand that the parasites are going to give you a substitute of the state, but not the actual state. However, we often have to move through the parasites to get to the state. So, distinguishing between functional peak states and pathogen is very important. We know a lot of things that happen in spiritual practices are actually pathogens. So the chakras, the meridians, kundalini, I don't go into the details about that, but we know it's a problem. Some people try to focus on the Merkaba, not a good idea. The over-identification with the creator is a huge problem for some people. So be very careful, very, very careful, and almost paranoid about it, Grant would say. What I would advise is to always start with the assumption that the parasite is a substitute for the real deal, and the parasite is going to try and fool you. And don't let it fool you. Don't let yourself be fooled. The parasite is going to appear as something magnificent. It's going to appear as a god or a goddess and give you ecstasy or bliss or love. And you're going to be, oh my God, this god, this goddess is so good to me. I'm devoted to you. I'm going to give you everything. And you receive this bliss, but there's a price to pay. And it's not good. This apparent deity might be a parasite. So you have to be very careful, and you have to be willing to see the truth. You have to be really wanting to see the truth in this, and to see that this God that gives you ecstasy might actually be a parasite. So a nice tip for this is to switch from spiritual view to biological view, and then you will be able more clearly to see what's happening. But it's tough. It can be very difficult. However, that's how you get to the real deal. So the reward for doing this work is indescribable in some cases. Now, I have more hypotheses about peak states and spiritual practices. For example, Tantra is one of the only body-focused spiritual paths. Many spiritual paths are going away from the body. Some of them are neutral about the body, but some of them, mainly Tantra and Taoism, are body-focused. So I imagine that being the body state could be part of it. But with a lot of studies and research and analysis, I haven't seen any path to this state in any tantric tradition. It just doesn't seem to be part of the tradition. So that was really surprising. Now, what about the optimal relationship and beauty way states, right? Because Tantra focuses on sex, death, and merging the feminine and masculine. So it seems to be going towards that direction a bit. However, same thing, I haven't seen these states anywhere in this tradition. It's not described in any source that I've looked at. I don't know any teacher who has those states, and there is no practice that seems to lead directly to these states. It seems like these states just don't exist in the tradition. They are not known by the tradition, which is surprising again, but that's how it is. Now, you might be wondering about the Buddhist enlightenment state, because it's a very important state for Buddhists. Now, good news, we have identified the state using some knowledge from the Rinzai Zen tradition, where they call it Satori. It's the same state that is looked for in all Buddhist traditions, and it's something they call the enlightenment or the awakening. So we know the state, we know the developmental event, we know the parasites that block the state, and we are working through it at the moment. It's in research, but we don't have a process for it. Hopefully, Grant and Kirsten might tell you more about this if they want to, but it's still in research. However, we know the state, and it's a very important and interesting state, and it's very different from the others. It's not beauty way, it's not joy, it's not inner peace, it's not connection to Gaia, it's not the sacred, it's something else. It's a different state in and of itself, but it's very profound and important. If you want to know a bit more about the state, you can read the Heart Sutra, which is a very central text in Buddhism. It's also called sometimes the Heart of Perfect Wisdom, and the text basically describes the states. However, there's something very funny, is that if you don't have the peak state, the text just might not make sense. You will read it and say, what is this? I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't understand what they describe. However, if you get the state and you read this, suddenly it will be, oh, yes, of course, it makes sense. That's exactly what I'm experiencing. So you can go and look for the Heart Sutra if you're interested in that, but hopefully in the future we'll have more to say about it. However, we're making progress, and that's really exciting because this state is huge, but just like the other states, right? And there's so much more to explore. There are other traditions, Sufism, Shaivism, Advaita Vedanta. I'm actually interested in looking for the end goals of these traditions, but there's just so much work to do about it. But it's also very exciting. So what about you? How do you experience life currently, and how do you want to experience it? Do you have a longing, a quest, a goal, something that you're trying to reach, even if you cannot define it precisely yet? There is something that might be at work here. So I'm always be interested to talk about it with you and exchange on these topics, and to learn about your explorations. That's a fascinating topic for me, and probably very useful and of great benefit for not just us, but all of humanity. And a little bit of provocation here, but what level of ecstasy are you willing to feel in your life? Well, if you want more ecstasy, then you have to work for it. And it's tough, but the rewards are just so exceptional that, you know, it's really worth it. So here's some bibliography. I really recommend the three first authors, Margot Anand, David Deida, and Christopher Wallis. And good thing they write in English, so you don't have to decipher those very obscure Sanskrit texts. We have so much knowledge now that's available. So here's where to contact me. Please use mostly WhatsApp if you want to get in touch with me. I'm currently in Bali. I might be in Australia, depending on when you contact me. That's where I'm at the moment. So always happy to have a conversation with my fellow big set therapists and researchers and explorers. So thank you for being here today. I hope this was interesting. Please feel free to reach out, and have a great day. Have a great continuation. I wish you the best, and Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for watching. For more information, please visit www.peakstates.com.